Math was never our strong suit, but breaking down Ohio State football is. Sit back and join us for Buckeye Grove Instant Access, part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network.
You can do it!
Brought to you by BuckeyeGrove.com. Post-game thoughts, immediate analysis, and much, much more to put the big game into perspective. Without any further delay of game, here's your host, Kevin Noon.
Kevin, goddammit.
Welcome to a Friday here on the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. What's BIA? Buckeye Grove Instant Access. Okay, again, you got me, maybe BGIA, but that doesn't work when we're trying to put ourselves out there to be best in America, just like the Ohio State secondary. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and I want to welcome in our guest for this big edition, Andy Anders, and that name should be familiar to those of you who've been around Buckeye Grove for some time. He was a fantastic intern with us, and I've always said that, if we could ever cross paths again, we would, and lo and behold, here we are. And Andy, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be back working with Rivals, and just looking forward to a great year. My first year covering recruiting. Looking forward to the opportunity that provides.
Yeah, you've had quite the little trip here. You were covering team with me, and then you were assistant sports editor at the Lantern. For those of you who don't spend a lot of time following Ohio State, that's the official newspaper at The Ohio State University, and now you're covering recruiting. So you've really had yourself a nice little run here.
Yeah, nice start to my journalism career. Working on hopefully provides good things in the future. I'm just excited to be back on board with Rivals and getting content out into the world.
For those of you who know me offline, Andy's always been one of my favorites. I don't try to play favorites with any of my interns. I love them all equally, but I've always kind of joked that Andy's my adopted son, so it's great having him back in the fold. And when an opportunity arose for covering recruiting, I threw him into the lake of fire, and he's been drinking from a fire hose here, trying to get in with all of that. But I think it's a good fit. And what are your impressions just right off the bat, going from a team coverage guy to a recruiting guy, and some of the things that you face there?
Right. I think it's definitely been a transition for me. There's a lot when it comes to the team, how structured things are, and how you have a presser this day and you go to this place and these players are available, and then you base your content on how what players are made available by the team. And whereas recruiting, it's going out and finding all your own sources. You might reach out to a lot of guys and only a few of them get back to you, and try to make connections with guys and develop relationships with, a lot of recruits is a new experience for me. Also, the style of writing is a little bit different, I think, from the team side, where, you're talking to people and you're reporting on sort of what you hear and trying to gather information and intel about specific players. So it's a new experience for me. I think I'm, after I'm now a month in here, I'm starting to adjust and find a groove with it. Still would like to develop some more contacts than I have at the moment, but I had what I thought was a pretty good scoop for the Skull session the other day on the recruiting summit Ohio State's holding. So I think that's a good sign for things moving forward. I'm just getting settled in here.
Yeah, before we start talking about the kids in particular, why don't you, that's had a couple of days to breathe. Why don't you just share with our listeners a little bit about this recruiting summit that's coming up? Just some of the, maybe some of the broad strokes about, what's on tap.
Right. So it'll be, my estimation, it'll be the 15 to 20 kids. We still haven't gotten, an exact number yet on how many people will be attending this. But basically, Ohio State commitments for the class of 2021 are hosting a summit in Columbus, both for the class that is currently, the current commits, and major targets guys like Tristan Lee or JT Tuimoloau or Emeka Egbuka, the top targets, can come in and see Columbus. And it's a way, essentially, to visit Ohio State and visit Columbus without coming into contact with the coaches because it's the dead period, and you're not allowed to have in-person contact during this dead period that's now been extended to January. But it'll be a multi-day affair. Jack Sawyer, five-star defensive end, the top-rated Ohio State commit for the 2021 class, will be hosting a lot of guys, he told me. Didn't expand a whole lot further, but he'll be hosting a number of guys. They said they're still working out exactly how many will stay with him and what the arrangements will be for everyone else and how many players exactly are going to attend. But that'll, in essence, will be the recruiting summit for Ohio State.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's very, different circumstances. You don't have official visits. You don't have unofficial visits. I mean, if we're being completely honest, I mean, the dead period runs through the end of December into January. You then have 5 weeks, give or take, to traditional signing day. As it stands now, early signing day happens before the dead period would end. So you're having to get a little creative. And Ohio State's not the only program that's done this. We've seen, depending on the level of official, I mean, none of it truly is official because it can't be university sponsored or anything along those lines. But we've seen Oklahoma do something to a lesser extent. LSU, you better believe, your major heavy hitters out there are going to be doing it. But it certainly is beneficial to Ohio State having Jack Sawyer out of Pickerington, local to Columbus, kind of spearheading this. And I wouldn't say he's necessarily maybe the most vocal of all of the commits. He's plenty vocal, don't get me wrong, but having somebody right there kind of at home base, makes it a little bit easier than having to, maybe rely on somebody who's in Ironton or in Streetsboro or Cincinnati or wherever.
Right. Right there in the vicinity of Columbus, guys can just stay there, and then you can hop right onto Ohio State's campus, essentially. And that's a top fly guy who's a leader in the class, been committed longer than anybody. Really just an advantage for Ohio State to have that opportunity for their top uncommitted targets.
I live in Pickerington too. Do you think I could pass myself off as maybe a 2-star offensive tackle or something like that, and maybe get the deep intel on it? Maybe a 2-star offensive tackle with a receding hairline and about a BMI of 400.
Yeah, you just look old for a high schooler is all, and maybe I'd peg you more as interior defensive line, Noon. I don't know. Maybe you're a natural guard.
There you go. I mean, it's like the scene with the actor Steve Buscemi going up trying to fit in high school. It's like, hello, fellow kids. Probably wouldn't work out, but
the hoodie and the skateboard.
Exactly. Exactly.
Giving some to the professors,
Exactly. But nobody wants to hear about me trying to get into this recruiting summit. Let's start by talking about some of the players in this class. I mean, it's a tremendous class. It's ranked number 2 right now according to the Rivals team rankings. It was 1 for most of the time. Ohio State took a hit when Tumezi Adelaye decommitted from the class, but and Alabama overtook them. But I still think Ohio State has a really good shot at ending the class number 1. But we're not going to go over every player, but we'll go over a few, take a break, and then go over a couple more. But let's kind of just start with Jack Sawyer. I remember you sending me a note after the first time you watched Jack's tape from a professional standpoint. I mean, it's one thing to look at it as, a recruiting fan or somebody who's just interested in Ohio State, or even consuming it as somebody who's just trying to get ahead of covering what may be next. But looking at it from that most critical of eyes, what do you see out of Jack?
Well, what I was blown away with when I review tape of top elite high school D linemen, and that's the position I played in high school. So many guys, because they're such physical specimens. They're so much bigger and stronger and probably quicker than the offensive linemen they go against. Almost just rely on that athleticism to make plays. And Jack Sawyer has that athleticism in spades, don't get me wrong, but what blew me away was seeing how technical and smart he was as a football player. The dude demonstrated multiple pass rush moves on tape. He's got a nonstop motor. He could make plays he could come from the backside of a play and make a tackle, and you don't see that a whole lot, which was really impressive for me. He's 6'5", 240, and he can bull rush guys that are bigger than him on tape, just knock them to the ground. And that's, at 240, the typical Ohio State defensive end is usually in that 260 to 270 range. Give him a couple years with Mick. That's Coach Mickey Marotti, Ohio State strength and conditioning coach. You give him a couple years in that program, and he gets up to that 260 and it's muscle, he'll be just a physical force off the edge. But like I was saying, you see a guy who's smart enough to recognize a quick pass, get up and bat it down rather than rush, a guy who can string out an outside run, a guy who can attack a read option or squeeze the hip down on a trap play. These technical little things that you pick up on from a D lineman, where he's not just relying on his size and genetic gifts, is really something special, especially when you consider he'll be going to a coach that's the best at honing those things in the country with Larry Johnson, or one of the best at least. So Jack, nothing not to like about Jack Sawyer from what I watched.
If I were to tell you that Jack Sawyer not only is the best football player in the state of Ohio, but is also potentially, if not the best basketball player, top 2 or 3, would you believe that?
Yeah, I would. That sounds accurate. I haven't watched any of his basketball tape, but I've heard great things.
Yeah, you need to. I'll send you some after the show.
For sure.
Let's move on to Ohio State's other 5-star commit, and that would be offensive lineman Donovan Jackson out of Houston. I had the opportunity to go down to Episcopal High School 2 summers ago and talk to Donovan when he was still very much undecided at that point. Great kid. Already at that point was a physical freak. What do you see off of the tape with Donovan?
Honestly, just another Wyatt Davis style player, that big physical mauler who's just an all around solid guard. 6'4", 295. He's kind of got prototypical size for the position. The dude, like a lot of high school, elite high school offensive linemen, he'll run over anyone. He drives his feet very well through contact, which is always something you love to see. Finishing blocks, the first 2 steps, and then exploding up and through a run block. Can climb to the second level well. Athletic. He could get out and pull in Ohio State's offense. Again, just as with Sawyer, just a really well-rounded player. And as you said, a great guy. And you love just watching his tape, his mentality on the field, just to go anywhere that his team needs and make a huge block. He's making blocks in the third level even in some of those plays, safeties and really just all over the field, mauling anyone in his path.
I want to talk about one more duo of guys, and then we'll take a quick break. And then when you talk about recruiting for any class, especially a school like Ohio State, you need to talk about quarterback, and that would be Kyle McCord. And he's committed, as well as one of his top wide receivers, Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously the son of Marvin Harrison Sr., but a pair of guys out of Philadelphia. So much of the identity of a recruiting class, especially these days, is around who the quarterback is going to be. And Ohio State certainly has some great options moving forward, knowing that this, barring something crazy, this is going to be Justin Fields last year. So then they're going to have Jack Miller and C.J. Stroud, And then Kyle McCord is going to walk right in, and with so a quarterback or both of the quarterbacks will have limited experience as backups to Fields, but McCord could really walk in and have an opportunity to try and get right in the mix, and then you bring in Marvin Harrison, and I'll get into the other wide receivers in a minute, but somebody who is just another huge piece to the puzzle on the heels of Ohio State bringing in one of the greatest receiver classes in that I can remember.
Yeah. So both of those guys, Kyle McCord and Marvin Harrison, I think will be multi-year starters at Ohio State for sure. McCord could give C.J. Stroud and Jack Miller a run for their money after a year as a freshman. I think they'll both be redshirt freshmen next season, probably, or maybe sophomores if they play enough games.
They wouldn't have. They wouldn't lose a year of eligibility based on this. 2020, yo.
Oh, that is true. I forgot about that rule. See, I've been covering recruiting. I forget about forget about the team, the new eligibility rules for the team. But regardless, McCord was making some incredible reads on his passes and really just showed ability in every area you want from a high school quarterback. Really strong arm, really accurate thrower of the ball. But when you're in high school and you're able to make the back shoulder throws, lead guys, ball placement is what I saw from McCord a lot on his tape. That blew me away because it's so rare to see a high school quarterback that can place the football and not only have the ability to do that, but know when to make certain types of throws. That was the main thing that stood out to me from McCord. Harrison is just another great all-around receiver, fast, runs really fluid routes down the field, a guy who can get open in a lot of spots, I think similar to his dad, really. If you watch Marvin Harrison with the Colts, he always had an ability to get open when Peyton Manning needed him to. So I think that is a potential knockout combo, 1-2, to watch in the future for Ohio State, McCord and Harrison there.
We will talk about the rest of the players coming out of the state of Ohio, as well as a couple others, maybe somebody that I don't mention that Andy wants to talk about, and we will talk about what is next for this class of 2021 for Ohio State on the other side of this quick break. Hague Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Welcome back to the BIA podcast. I am your host, Kevin Noon. I am joined by Andy Anders, one of our great recruiting guys, and we are talking Ohio State's class of 2021. So far, we've talked about the top guys in the class in terms of the Rivals recruiting rankings, and I want to turn our attention now to guys out of the state of Ohio. And, Andy's got such great detailed information and opinions on all of them. Sometimes it's a little difficult to go through each of them, but the guys that I'm talking about here, we've already talked about Jack Sawyer, but defensive tackle Michael Hall, offensive lineman Ben Crissman, wide receiver Jaden Ballard, linebacker Reed Carrico, and out of Cincinnati, Jalen Johnson as well. I want to talk about Reed Carrico for a minute, the linebacker out of Ironton down on the river. I've had the opportunity to go out and see him practice, and granted, it wasn't scrimmage or anything like that. It was still pretty early in the return to football plan. Kid is just physically impressive. I mean, you look at him and you think that he might already be a college sophomore. You have to remind yourself that he is a senior in high school, should honestly be thinking about prom and things like that. And, he's this kid's a machine.
Yeah, and a very versatile athlete too. 6 carries for 190 yards last week for Ironton. He's their star running back in addition to being obviously an Ohio State commit 4-star guy at linebacker. And you watch his running back tape, and it actually does make you excited to see him at that linebacker position, the way he can just run over guys. You see on his running back highlights, guys just bounce right off of him, and it tells you how strong he is. And to have those kinds of runs, your legs constantly have to be moving, which does serve you at the linebacker position for sure. Not talking specifically about him as a linebacker, very athletic, as with most players in this Ohio State class, but it's the ability, it's the instincts of that inside linebacker position. He's shown capability in the pass rush on his highlights, which you like from that. Ohio State, loves to use creative blitzes and get pressure on guys. Can run fit very well. A lot to like about Reed Carrico at linebacker.
As I said, I got to move kind of quickly through the Ohio guys because we can't hit all of them here. A position that is of need, you always need to be recruiting it, is offensive line. And Ben Crissman out of Richfield, 6'6", 298. We have him as a high 4-star. He is somebody that maybe doesn't get talked about as much as some of the other guys in the class, but you pop in that tape. I don't know why we don't talk about him more.
Oh, absolutely. Dude's just I mentioned Donovan Jackson as a mauler too. Ben Crissman maybe even more so. The dude, if you want to talk about a run blocking mentality, the dude is just, he eats people for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Eats defensive linemen for breakfast, lunch, and dinner on those run blocks, man. I had the opportunity to talk with Ben over the phone a couple weeks ago. Very, very intelligent guy. Well-spoken, honestly. And he talked about, he's got that classic football mentality of you can be the nicest person off the field. You can be friends with somebody, but once you step between the sidelines, it's go time. And you just, you're a mean SOB. So that's the kind of mentality you want from a big physical offensive tackle. And Ben Crissman will bring that to Ohio State.
Two positions that they've recruited very well. I mean, they're recruiting very well, period. I mean, let's just not, sell that short. But I'll give you your choice of, and the numbers aren't equal, so you can sit there and say, well, I'm going to talk about the other one because there are just more guys there. But are you more impressed with their running back recruiting with Evan Pryor and Trevion Henderson, or their defensive back recruiting with Ja'Kalen Johnson, Andre Turrentine, Jansen Dunn, Denzel Burke, and Jordan Hancock?
Well, yeah, both are impressive, obviously, but I think Trevion Henderson and Evan Pryor have to be what I'd give the slight edge to if you're asking me which position group is better moving forward. Trevion Henderson, you pop in the tape and it's just, okay, this dude is a game changer at running back. Tremendous cuts, kind of that J.K. Dobbins thing where he can just slide one direction and make a ton of guys miss. But just glides on his runs and breaks a lot of tackles. I believe he has a 12-minute highlight reel where he doesn't get tackled a single time. I believe that's the thing of him with his tape. The entire you get over 10 minutes, you're not getting tackled on a highlight reel as a running back. That says something, The dude is a game breaker at that position. And he's a leader for the class too. That was another big thing with him. He's one of, if not the best recruiters for prospects, as a prospect for the Buckeyes. And then Evan Pryor is kind of a very nice compliment to him. Evan's a really fast player, sub 4.40. Just that game-breaking speed that you want to complement a guy like Trevion, who's more of an all-around dynamic player.
All right, I'm going to throw a question at you as we start to wind down here. We've talked about a lot of players, mentioned most of them to be honest, but if there's a player in this class that we didn't focus in on and talk about them directly, who's the one player on the list? And I know this is like us going to the coaches after after the first day of practice and be like, who's really standing out to you? Well, I really don't want to name any names because I don't want to miss anybody, but I'm gonna throw you into the fire there. Who's somebody we didn't talk about, and why do you mention this player in particular?
Oh, I think Michael Hall, defensive tackle from Streetsboro, Ohio, is really underrated as a defensive tackle, or not, doesn't get talked about enough, I think. Like Jack Sawyer, there's a lot of things I see from him on tape where I'm like, well, this guy isn't relying on his physical gifts at all. He keeps very good pad level, always gets penetration on an offensive line, and just such an explosive, hard-hitting athlete. He's got that kind of fire on his tape that you love to see from that position. 6'3", 275, will be great under. I think he's the kind of player that Larry Johnson could develop into a great defensive tackle. And he doesn't get a lot of talk, especially since Ohio State just landed another 4-star D tackle from Virginia, Tyleik Williams. But I think Michael Hall, honestly, is one of the more underrated, or at least underappreciated assets in this Ohio State class here.
Yeah, you sit there and you say maybe underrated or underappreciated, but you go to his profile. He's a Rivals 100 kid at 77, but honestly, yeah, I think that he is a player that certainly has a strong case for moving up by the time we get to our final rankings. He is just one of these types of kids who plays to the echo of the whistle. I mean, using all of those football bad sayings or whatever. I mean, he's a real deal. But news could be coming up here in the next day or two for Ohio State in terms of recruiting, and we're gonna end it on this. What should Ohio State fans be looking forward to in terms of the class of 2021 here in the very near future?
Yeah, so possible commitment this weekend, commitment watch. Me and Joseph Hastings, our full-time recruiting reporter, have both forecasted Zin Mikowski to Ohio State, 3-star offensive tackle, former Louisville commit, recently decommitted Louisville commit. He announced the top 4 He announced top 4 recently, and Ohio State was included in it. Obviously, me and Joseph both forecasted him there. But I think he's another in the line of really developmental offensive line prospects that Ohio State has undertaken in the past couple of years. Last year, it was guys like Grant Toutant and Trey LaRue, those kinds of players that could develop into very solid starters in the future for Ohio State. I think it will take some time for Zin. One advantage he has is that he played in a zone blocking scheme, which a lot of high schoolers don't do before they arrive at Ohio State. And for those that aren't familiar, on the offensive line, there's 2 types of blocking, right? You have power blocking and zone blocking. Where zone blocking is what Ohio State does, and that's where you're blocking a spot more than you're blocking a man. You step left and you take who's there, or you step right and you take who's there. So the fact that Zin is used to that should help with his transition to Columbus. Really good run blocking talent, but his pass blocking, if I'm being honest, could use a little bit of sharpening. When I watched his tape, he didn't always move laterally well enough to stop an elite, college defensive end. Show that kind of mobility, but definitely a mauler in the run game. I've used that term a lot today, but he's definitely someone who has the physical edge to him in run blocking. So that'll be a solid commitment for Ohio State if they can land him tomorrow.
Yeah, and I want to go to our message board and quote what Josh Hemholt, our Midwest recruiting analyst, said of him, and I quote, "He's physically transformed pretty dramatically since we last saw him on film as a junior. Watching early senior season film, he's going to move up when we do our rankings next. Have not done a full evaluation, so cannot say how high, but stock is definitely on the rise." So obviously there are other people who agree with you. He seems to I mean, you just look at what happened leading up to his decommit from Louisville. He picked up, he had Ohio State offer, Penn State, Florida State. Obviously right now Florida State needs offensive linemen like, we need oxygen. I mean, they're in bad shape there. But the point being, for a kid that, I challenge most people to find Floyd's Knob on the map. It's a suburb of Louisville on the Indiana side of the state line. Somebody that, maybe would not get the same type of notice as, I don't know, somebody coming out of Massillon, Ohio, or Miami, Florida, or somewhere like Dallas, Texas. But, they're going to go out and find the talent, and he's obviously done enough to start earning those major offers. And, if all goes according to plan here in 24 plus hours, he could become the 20th member of this Ohio State recruiting class.
Absolutely. And yeah, I would agree with that evaluation by Josh there. His stock has definitely been on the rise as of late. Like you said, look at the offers. So that could be something to look forward to for Ohio State fans.
Well, we've been going about 31 minutes here. I want to give Andy one last shot for any final thoughts of things that maybe we didn't talk about before we put this one in the books. Andy, anything else?
No, I'm just happy. I'm happy to be aboard here. I'm trying to settle in and get the best scoops possible for Rivals listeners. And thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for being on the show. And thank you for everybody out there listening. I told you we would start going to 3 days a week. Here we are. We've delivered 3 days this week. We'll try and do it all again next week. And, once again, I am your host, Kevin Noon. Want to thank Andy Anders for joining us here on the BIA podcast. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you very soon.
Be sure to stay up to date with Buckeye Grove Instant Access when the news breaks or after the big game. Exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher as part of the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. Hit that subscribe button so you can stay in the know and never miss a single episode.